Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Now recently I posted a video about Vise stops, and I showed how useful they are for productivity. And I promised in that video that I would do a how-to on how this particular one was made. This is the one that I used in that video. And it's nice because it's got this dowel pin here that allows you to set the part away from the Vise stop so that you can actually machine all the way around it. Or you can get in there with a micrometer and measure it. And it's highly useful. It's also not a bad beginner milling project, so if you've never made anything on the mill, or if you've only made a few projects on the mill, this is actually a really nice one. It's useful for the machine itself, and it's actually relatively simple to make. There's just the one body that you're making. It does have a lot of features though, so you have to kind of think your way through it, and it's a good exercise. I'm starting out with a 5/8 inch square cold rolled steel blank, and that is about 16 millimeters for the metric folks. Now my finished length for the part is 1.5 inches, or around 37 or 38 millimeters for the metric guys. So I have cut my blank to 1 5/8 inches, about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters too long. I do that so I know that I've got plenty of material to clean up each end and take a measurement and then cut it to final length. This is going to be my first pass, and all I need to do is touch off. I'll move in about 10 thousandths, maybe 15, and just clean off all the saw marks on this side. Alright, my side's nice and clean, this side's done. I've got to take it out, I've got to deburr all these things just to make sure that everything's not going to sit weird in the vise, and I've also got to clean off all these little chips that I just made to make sure they're not sitting under my part. So here I'm going to do the same thing on the second side. I've got to touch off, I'm going to make a cleanup pass, and once I have a nice clean surface I can take a measurement and I'll be able to know exactly where I am and where I need to be. There's my touch off. I move in that same 15 thousandths. You might be asking, why 15 thousandths? Well, 10 to 15 thousandths of an inch tends to be a nice predictable cut, whereas a heavy cut, if you moved in 50 or 60, depending on the flex of the end mill, you may take off more, you may take off less. So it's not really a predictable cut, and a roughing cut like that isn't going to leave the best surface finish. And I don't take this out of the vise in order to do it. I'm going to do it right here, because if I take it out of the vise, I lose my position. Right now I know exactly where the edge of my end mill is, and I am at 1.599 inches. I know that I've got to be at 1.5, so that means I've got to take off 99 thousandths of an inch. I've zeroed my digital readout, and I'm going to go ahead and move back over this way because I don't want to be climb cutting. I turned the machine on to move back just so I don't accidentally chip my cutter. This happens to be a carbide cutter. I'm not going to take all 99 off at a time. I'm going to take a few passes here. So this one is 40 thousandths. Again, cranking back to the original side so I can avoid climb milling. Here's another 40. This is going to leave me around 19 thousandths. Now for the remainder I'm going to take 2 passes. So I'm moving in to 90 thousandths right there. I'll take a pass and then I'll take a measurement. This should leave me with around 9 thousandths of an inch. Make sure that I don't have any chips in there. Notice I'm wiggling my mic to make sure that it's seated. I lock it before I take it off. And I've got just shy of 9. I've got 8 7/10. So that's right where we thought we would be. And let's go ahead and take that last pass. Alright, one last measurement just to see where we are. Again, make sure your mic is seated. Make sure you use the friction thimble or ratchet thimble that you have on your micrometer too. It gives you a much more consistent measurement. I'm at 1.4999, well within my plus or minus 5 thousandths tolerance. So the next step is going to be to mill this down to thickness, and I should have enough clearance to do that with these parallels. I'm going to switch end mills though, so I can do it all in one pass. So I've switched end mills. This just happens to be an indexable end mill, but any end mill will do. But it is 3/4 of an inch wide, and that's going to allow me to machine over the entire surface without having to make multiple passes. What I need to do is bring my knee up until the end mill touches off, and then I can zero that. Oop, there we go. I brought my knee up just a little bit more so that I'll remove a respectable amount of material, and I'm going to go ahead and zero my knee now. So after this pass, the dial will be reading 0. I'll be able to take a measurement on the thickness that I've just created, and then I'll know how far I need to go to get to my target dimension, which in this case is 450 thousandths of an inch. Now I am using the power feed that I have on my X. Of course you can do this by hand as well. You just have to look at the surface finish and make sure that it's acceptable. Got a nice surface finish there. Let me go ahead and take a measurement. I am at 609 thousandths and 4 tenths. Now again, my target dimension is 450 thousandths, so that means I've got 159 thousandths and change to take off. Again, I'm not going to take that all in one shot. I'm going to take multiple passes and leave at least a couple of finish cuts so that I can get a predictable measurement there at the end. Now in this particular case, you don't have to worry about climb or conventional milling because my cutter is actually wider than my piece and I'm running right down the middle of it. So you have climb on one side and conventional on the other, and the two forces balance each other out. Those were all my roughing cuts out of the way, and now I'm going to go ahead and take my first finish cut. This should leave about 10 thousandths of an inch left. We are indeed just about 10 thousandths above our target. We are at 9 8 tenths right now. So here is our last pass. Now you really want to notice that I actually let the end mill run all the way off the part before I stopped the feed, and I didn't crank very quickly once the leading edge was off. Now the reason is, if your head isn't totally within tram, it could actually still be cutting on the trailing edge of your cutter, and if you crank quickly once the leading edge is off, then you can leave some nasty surface finishes. Now I'm going to take the piece out and deburr it, and at this point we really need to start thinking about our order of operations. We really want to drill and tap our holes here, and drill and ream our pinhole there before we cut these grooves. Otherwise it makes it very inconvenient and nowhere near as solid to actually hold the piece in those positions. So the grooves are going to be the very last thing that we do. I've got my part deburred, and at this point I want to talk a little bit about layout. I normally don't do a whole lot of layout just because I've got a digital readout, I've got the print there, but in this case you've got a lot of features on this part that have to be oriented correctly to each other. So if you're looking to minimize mistakes, layout is a pretty good idea. So to do the layout, you use a layout fluid such as blue Dicom. They have a red Dicom as well. Some people like that. They say they can see it a little better. If you don't want to buy this stuff, you can actually just go ahead and use a Sharpie marker and just color your part all in black, and you can see the scribe lines pretty well. So when I'm doing this, I'm going to try to get as much of the dicum off of the brush as I possibly can, just to make it a nice thin coat. If you have too much, it tends to glob up and makes it very difficult to actually scribe the lines. You don't get as clean a scribe as you would like. And of course I'm wearing gloves just to keep from looking like a smurf later. This evaporates pretty quickly, so you shouldn't have to wait long, but if you want, you can use some compressed air. Try not to use too much because it'll potentially splatter all over the place. You can see on this end where I got a bit too much dicum on there, and that's what it kind of looks like. You just end up with this big kind of drip that doesn't really dry all that quickly and makes you wait a little longer. Now at this point you can start transferring dimensions from your print to your part. And you can do that with your scribing method of choice. I'm going to use a pair of calipers, and I'm going to go ahead and start laying out all my lines here. So I have a step 400 thousandths in from this end. I'm going to make those marks on the side as well so I can see where the grooves are. On the other end of the part, I have a groove that is 188 thousandths from the end. Just like that, and again I'm going to put those on the side as well. So now we have a nice visual reference for what the shape of the part is going to be, and this is just going to help you not get confused while you're machining it, because it's very easy with a complicated geometry like this to put it into the vise the wrong way and accidentally machine on the wrong side of the part. You don't have to use a pair of calipers to scribe here. You can also do this on a surface plate with a surface gauge with a scribe on that. You could use a height gauge. You can use any type of scribing tool. If you really wanted to, you could use a square with a hand scribe, just as long as you had a scale to mark out where your parts are. It wouldn't necessarily be as accurate. Accuracy with the scribing isn't super important because you're not really relying on these lines as to where to stop machining. You don't want to eyeball that. You want to actually take measurements. The scribe lines are just there to give you a visual reference for what to machine away and how to orient the part for your machining. This video is really starting to get pretty long, so I'm going to go ahead and break it up into two parts just to make it a little easier to watch. Stick around for part 2.